Were you as disheveled as I was with all your equipment and stuff after this weekend?
Yeah, I had to put it all back together.
That's way better there. Your mic sounds good now.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the Joe McDonald we know and love. He's back.
There he is. There he is.
That's what, real funny, real quick, Nick, last week we did this podcast, and Joe was in the wrong spot. So our guest obviously was a podcast listener because he gets back to that backdrop, and the guy goes, "Oh, there's the backdrop." He's like, "This feels right now."
Yeah, it looks like you're in a meth den somewhere.
Yeah, no, this is my padded room.
Yeah,
made just for me.
I'm gonna go with meth den. It looks like a meth den to me. Like you're making meth. Admit it. You are, aren't you?
Doesn't everyone in Appalachia?
And you're in a college town.
Everybody but Ben.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's right. Well, Ben, you're not really in Appalachia. What am I thinking?
No, we're down in Georgia.
No.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm glad the clean living's showing through. It's a nice compliment.
Not me. I'm getting older by the minute.
No, you're not. Crazy. I see your posts all the time, and you're like reminiscing on getting old. It's like, come on, Nick, you're.
Oh man, it's funny when you spring chickens end up my age, you'll feel the same way. It catches up with you fast. It's them babies that do it. You start having kids, that shit makes you feel old. Yeah,
they run you into the ground a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Not in a bad way though. I've sure enjoyed it. It's good. It's good that they ride horses. It's good that she rides horses. That's fun,
Yeah, I don't see how you can so I'm looking at your Instagram right now, and you're just doing all this crazy stuff, like flying planes and shooting animals I've never heard of before, and I don't see how you can feel like you're old and be constantly doing that type of stuff.
That's the reason I'm old. That's the reason. So I was blessed with a baby face for a long time. I mean, when I was 30, I looked like I was 12 still, I'm finally starting to show my age a little bit, but I'm a jack of all trades and master of none. You know what I mean? Or maybe I'm a master of one. I'm a pretty good fiddle player. Other than that, I'm kind of a jack of all trades and master of none. And it keeps life interesting. That's for damn sure.
I really like this photo.
That's my wedding.
You look like a different person right there, man.
That's actually my first wedding, my test wife. And I'm there with my mom and my sister in a hot tub. And I'm there in all my wedding duds in the hot tub. Katie bar the door.
That is the thinnest facial hair of all time.
Yeah, I had to work real hard on getting that goatee back then. Now I don't have any problem with it, but back then it'd be like Ben trying to grow a goatee. I don't think it would work very good.
Yeah, probably not.
Oh yeah, I'm terrible at growing facial hair.
I'm trying to see. Speaking of young Nick, I don't know if I could find the photo, but this is really funny. My fiance's cousin, we may have told you this, Nick, already, but her cousin was a big Kenny Chesney fan, just wild out of her mind Kenny Chesney fan. And so Helen is going through her phone or photos. It was hard printed photos from years ago, and they're doing what girls do, on the floor, going through photos. And then sure enough, there's 4 pictures of Nick Hoffman right up front. Young Nick. I don't know. God, you must have been you look like you were 19, but you had your guitar.
Oh, I'm sure I probably was. Yeah. And when I started with Kenny, weird. I was 19, 20 years old. Yeah.
Wow. And so Helen's she's like, "Hey, I know this guy."
Yeah. That's funny. It's when you've been in the entertainment business that long, you always start thinking what pictures are out there? You know what I mean? Because those early days were pretty crazy. It's I always worry someday I could never run for office. because I could never run for some sort of political office because there is some damning photo out there or some ass I slapped back in the day or something that is absolutely going to come back and haunt me. So I'm never going to run for political office. I can promise you that. You have my word. This message has been approved by Nick Hoffman.
Well, clearly you've given it some thought, though. What office would you run for?
I would never run for office.
Like game warden?
Game warden.
Chief game warden.
No. Yeah. No. Honestly, if I was ever gonna do anything in public service, it's probably the most thankless job of all time. But I would be like some sort of animal recovery officer, like an animal, like the dog pound guy. You know what I mean? Because I feel like all those animals deserve a good shake, and that's a job that is thankless. But the person who's doing that, I've seen the opposite side of it. Actually, I remember one time we had to call the animal control people on a neighbor's dog once, and they were not good to that dog. You know what I mean? I always thought if I was going to do any kind of public service, I think that's what I'd do. Something like that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But I guarantee you that's probably, like I said, very thankless, and also probably is poverty level pay.
Yeah,
but I would do it.
Yeah, it's probably like being a police officer, but the dogs don't have like cell phones to record you.
Exactly.
Like that would be a tough job. But
I love dogs so much that I just always feel bad. I'm not a serial rescuer like Natalie is. My wife Natalie is, and you guys have had Natalie on, I believe. But because I just don't have room for them, and I don't want to, I want to give everybody a good shake. But I like rescuing them and putting them somewhere else. You know what I mean? But we can't take any more damn animals at our house. No more.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, not to mention, have you ever seen a movie where the animal the dog pound guy was a good guy? He's always a bad guy.
Always the bad guy.
Like
yeah, the animal catcher is always the bad guy.
Yeah, you go over to your friend's house, their little kids are going to have a hard time liking you. Like, you're going to have to market yourself really well as like the
I never thought about it like guy. That. Yeah, suddenly kids don't like you.
Watching all the movies, Air Bud, they're watching, there's a couple, even TV
all the
shows,
Disney
right?
movies.
Like, they have nothing better to do one week on, heck, it could be NCIS. They're going to throw in some episode where this dog gets loose and they're all loving the dog, and then the dog pound guy comes and locks him up. It's like the free dinner for the movie industries. Put a bad dog catcher guy in there.
100%. That's it. Yeah. Well, maybe I retract my previous statement. Maybe no dog pound guy for me.
Yeah.
But that's a horrible thing though, because think about same thing with horses. Think about all the bad stuff that you got to see. It's very rarely a really positive situation you're going to if you're that guy. You know what I mean?
It's like never a positive situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No one ever said, and then we called animal control and it was all okay.
It was all okay. That's true. Yeah. Thanks for helping me sort through this life choice. I think, yeah. No, but again, it goes back to no public office for me, because there's too many skeletons in my closet, I'm sure of. I mean, I don't know what those skeletons are, but like most politicians probably don't. You know what I mean? That's what happens.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, I can appreciate that, because like you're not the age Ben and I are. You were talking about like, it being documented or something like that. Like, gosh, imagine if you were 10 years old when smartphones were invented. Like, I don't know, like people 10 years younger than me, when I'm old and in the nursing home, I don't know how anyone's going to run for president, because they'll just like know everything about that person's life.
That's right. It's all out there, and it's don't get me wrong. I was never a bad guy. I wasn't never disrespectful. I didn't do it, but I was, in your 20s out there, teens and 20s out there running around on the road. And I know there's something dumb I did. Right. You know what I mean?
Well, and you'll be held to like the social standard of like 30 years post behaving that way too,
which is
impossible.
It's ridiculous. So that's but you know, to anybody out there that I somehow offended, I'm sorry. I'll say it here right now.
Oh, man, you're making me feel really good about myself because I, not to toot my own horn, but I've been a pretty good kid most of my life. So if this horse thing doesn't work out, governor, president, dog catcher, it's looking bright.
You can be like, you're like the Dutton of Georgia, man.
Yeah.
You're soon to be governor.
Yeah. He's the clean one.
That's right.
Of the group.
But it's true though. I've, going back to what you were talking about earlier, I mean, I've been really lucky. I've lived a really, really cool life, and it starts with music and actually, starts with music on the farm and ends up somehow still with music and all these other avenues, it's like, we were just talking about, the older you get, the more reflective you get. It's like, I'm at that age now where I start to realize, man, this is a really cool life I've lived and I'm still doing it. You know what I mean? And, I feel really lucky for that.
So where did you grow up, Nick?
I grew up in Minnesota.
Okay. That's what I thought.
I grew up in Now Then, Minnesota, which is literally an intersection of a town, little farm town. And, there's at the intersection, a four-way stop, and there's a Case IH dealership, a gas station and meat market, a house on one corner, and then a church. And the guy that lives in the house owns all 4 lots, and I worked at that Case IH dealership growing up, and I worked at the meat market as well, and grew up on a little farm outside there. And Now Then the gas station sold T-shirts that said proudly, it said Now Then, Minnesota, population 47. It was like Mayberry.
Wow.
So cornfields everywhere and cattle and horses, and it was a great way to grow up. But I was only an hour from the Twin Cities, so actually less than an hour from the Twin Cities. So I had like the coolest mix of being able to grow up in the country and experience that, but also be close enough to a major city that I was able to enjoy all the cultural stuff of a city. So, if a concert came through town, I could go to that concert, and that was important to me as a musician growing up. As I got into playing in bands and stuff, there was a pretty vibrant music scene around the Twin Cities. And so, a legendary music scene really. And so I was really lucky to be a part of that. And so it was a great place to grow up because, like I said, I got the grounding of a country upbringing, but all the opportunity that came from being close enough to a big city, especially once I got my license and I could drive in and go see concerts and go see stuff like that. And, it's a great place to grow up. I've been in Nashville now technically longer than I lived in Minnesota. But I'm still fiercely a proud Minnesotan. If you ask me where are you from, I'm going to tell you Minnesota. I'm not going to tell you Tennessee.
Sure. I
mean, look at me. I look like an albino Viking Minnesota guy still,
Minnesota.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So
I'm looking at Now Then right now.
I guess about a week ago, I was doing a little lookup on you, see if there's anything that I didn't know anything about you. And but I came across a little article on Franchi Firearms, and it had a little excerpt, and it said, and I wrote it down because I thought it was kind of cool, and I wanted to ask you about, that part of your life, how you grew up, because it said, despite serving as a member of some of country music's newest and modern bands, Nick Hoffman is a direct stylist and descendant of Roy Acuff, Charlie Daniels, and Bob Wills. And it got me thinking because, they say, I don't know the age exactly, but when you're a kid, maybe between the age of like 6 and 10, or I could be off, but it's somewhere around there. You it might be a little older actually, but they say you kind of pick your genre of music that you're going to like and stick with for the rest of your life and be real loyal to. And
absolutely.
So back there in Minnesota, in your little town, despite just being in the country, what kind of informed your musical interest, and then specifically that classic country sound that I don't know if that was popular at the time or not. I think you would have been more in the rock and roll days, I think, right? But
well, I mean, I grew up like as far as what I was listening to on the radio, it was all country music. There was a local country station, K102, so I was listening to whatever the top 40 country was on that. But I'm a fiddle player, right? So I have no recollection of not playing the fiddle. So my grandparents were musical. They had jam sessions every Saturday at the Hoffman house. So my grandpa played violin and played some fiddle. He played upright bass guitar. My grandma played piano. And it was kind of just like known that they were going to play music every Saturday no matter what. And that's the way my grandma was raised. And so sometimes you didn't need an invite. You just showed up. And sometimes on a Saturday, 20 people would show up to play music. And then other times, nobody would show up, but we'd still play music, And so it was some of my earliest memories of falling asleep underneath my grandma's piano bench. Wow! And now I know, and I look back that they were drinking gin and tonics and having a big old time. But that was my musical upbringing. So to answer your question, I grew up on the records. I was influenced by the records that my grandparents had. My grandpa had a bunch of cassettes and a bunch of records of everything from Asleep at the Wheel to Bob Wills, Haggard and Jones, Freddie Fender, Jim Reeves. My grandma loved Marty Robbins. That's who I was trying to think of. So I grew up on that stuff. And it's funny because I actually got in a fight on the bus when I was like 12 years old because this kid made fun of me because I didn't know, up till that point, I didn't know anything other than country music. And I really didn't even pay attention to anything else. And I got in a fight with this kid, Joe Wittroba, because he made fun of me because I didn't know who New Kids on the Block was. And it was funny because he picked on me so bad about it that I finally, we got in a little tussle, and then I got suspended from the bus. And then the next chance I got, at the record store, I bought the New Kids on the Block record so that I wouldn't let that happen again. You know what I mean? That was like my first intro into pop music. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah, that's exactly it. Because you got to remember, the fiddle players don't have a lot of people to look up to. If you're a guitar player, just pick your poison. You know what I mean? But fiddle players, you're pretty much limited to a certain select group of artists. And then if you want to actually be like a fiddle player frontman, like you're really getting into a handful of people. We're talking about Bob Wills, you're talking about, Doug Kershaw, Charlie Daniels, Roy Acuff, like you mentioned. It's a small group of people that were true fiddle player frontmen, and that's what I aspired to be. So yeah, it all started with my grandpa's records, and those Bob Wills records, that was, for me, that and bluegrass. Those were the things when I was a kid. Up until I was 13 years old or so, I didn't know anything else existed.
Can I ask you a question that really hadn't occurred to me till right now? Like, I guess I kind of take it for granted. So if someone comes to me and they're like, "Oh, did you see, so-and-so's new album dropped?" You can like pretty much just get on your phone and like educate yourself in 45 minutes.
Absolutely.
So like, it just occurred to me as a kid, if someone brings up something like New Kids on the Block, which for the record, I just Googled them and I did not realize Mark Wahlberg was in that band.
Yeah, that goes to show our age difference right there.
Yeah. So like my whole pop culture.
And technically it wasn't Mark Wahlberg, it was his brother Donnie Wahlberg.
Yeah. Well, they both have vocals credits. on Google anyway. But anyway, so like, yeah, how did that work? Being kind of, because obviously you were hip to the music scene because it was something that was in your family, and you were really invested in yourself. Like, how did something get on your radar? Was like, oh, this new album dropped, or this new thing was there, or like, and then you're in like nothing, Minnesota.
Yeah.
So it's probably not just like, well, let me just run down the block.
No, back then, then, that's a great question. Back then it was the radio. I mean, now it's Spotify and all this stuff, but it was truly the radio. I remember there were two major radio stations in my area, K102, the country station, and then KDWB was the pop station. And I didn't really start listening to that, like I said, till I was like 13 years old. So, but I remember, sitting by my little clock radio for the top 8 at 8 on KDWB and waiting to see who the top 8 at 8 were going to be. And I remember particularly waiting for Living on a Prayer to come on when that was out. Like Bon Jovi, that was like such a big record. So that's how you discovered songs back then. It was either somebody told you about it, but most likely you were all listening to the same radio station. So it's whatever the radio station was playing is what you did. And then I just begged to go to the record store. You know what I mean? I would just beg and beg. My grandma would bring me to the record store. My grandpa would bring me to the record store. My dad would bring me to the record store. And I would spend my allowance on two things: records, or, eventually it was CDs, but cassettes, and Field and Stream magazine and hunting videos. That was like all I cared about, and so that's how you would discover music, is you would either hear it on the radio, or you'd see it in a magazine sometimes, but not really, or you'd hear it from your friends, or you'd find it at the record store. I remember there was this dude that worked at the local record store, and I used to go in there, and he liked the same kind of stuff. Okay, what do I need to check out? And then he would give you a copy of it, and you could go and you'd put it in a thing and listen to it on headphones in the record store. And then if you liked it, you take it, buy it and take it home. So it was a whole different world back then. That's how you discover music, But the cool thing about a record to me was that, or an album or a CD or whatever, is, you'd listen to 10, 12 songs and you'd sit there and pore over the liner notes, and you knew who every player was, and you knew what every word was. And you listened to that record intensely. And there was an advantage to that. And that was that you got to know it. You know what I mean? To this day, if I hear a 90s country song come on the radio that I haven't heard in 20 years, I still know every word. And it's because that's how obsessively I consumed that music. You know what I mean? And it's because I sat with those records and read the lyrics, which nobody does anymore,
Yeah. Well, and I agree with you, and I appreciate what you're saying, but there probably is some part of that it's like your childhood too, right? Because it's not absolutely. Like you sit and do that now.
I do it way less than I should.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty probably a unicorn when it comes to that with music, because I'm so pulled in so many different directions, and I've had a successful music career, and I still have new records coming out and all this stuff, but I'm not a consumer of music the way I used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure why. I'm not sure exactly why. I think a lot of it has to do with time. And also a lot of it has to do with, I'm at a point in my career where I kind of like just making my music. Mm. I'm not as inspired by listening to new music as I used to be. In fact, if I've got time to listen to music, I'm probably going back and listening to something that I liked in the past.
Yeah.
I'm way less into discovering new music than I used to be. Doesn't mean that I don't. And there are some artists right now that I really, really am into. But, I'm way more likely to dig into the past than I am to the future musically right now. Mm. That's just kind of a phase I'm in.
Yeah.
There's
probably something to that though, because I was thinking about that the other day. Because I'm, all my friends from high school, I'm still in like a fantasy football league with them.
Mm-hmm.
And my big thing when I was growing up was sports. I love sports, and I was like a sports encyclopedia.
Yeah.
I could like name every NFL player, every Virginia Tech football player, everything like that. And now I was talking with my buddy today, and I don't even know who's like starting at quarterback for Virginia Tech.
Man, I'm in the same boat. Yeah. I used to be I still am the world's biggest Vikings fan, but I don't follow it like I used to.
Yeah.
Because I've got other things
Exactly.
I don't do a fantasy team anymore, because if I've got a choice between spending an hour on fantasy stuff and riding my horse, I'm going to ride my horse.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And it's because I'm limited on my time. So it's like, I've got to delegate, and I can't do fantasy teams anymore. I can't, that's the same reason that I probably don't listen to new music, because if I've got a little time to be inspired by music, I'm probably going to dive back into something that I haven't heard in a while. You know what I mean? Same reason. Yeah. Maybe someday, but not right now.
You know who made a very similar comment in an interview that I watched maybe like a year ago about his music and how he was like going back into old stuff and not as involved as in the new stuff as he used to be, was Van Morrison.
Oh yeah.
Van Morrison said the same thing. When I was in high school, I was like a huge Van Morrison.
I think he's awesome too. And I think it's just everybody finds inspiration in different ways, right?
Yeah.
My inspiration came when I was younger from discovering new music. And now I find that maybe it's nostalgia, but really I find that there's a lot more to be learned, or there's just as much to be learned. For me to say there's a lot more to be learned is very condescending. For me personally, there's just as much to be learned from all this stuff that is all the water that's gone under the bridge than the water that's coming at the bridge right now. Because that's, it's like Paul McCartney said, there's nothing new under the sun musically. He said everything we ever did with the Beatles was just copied from somebody else. And if he was copying it way back then, what do you think people are doing now? Yeah, sure, there's definitely original sounds, but they'll all tell you they're just rehashing the same old shit,
Well, and here's something too I just thought of, Nick, was, maybe now that, like you said, you're getting older and you have more mileage and stuff, maybe it's the old stuff that kind of invokes more emotion.
There's no doubt about it. That's why the radio show I have on Apple, that's why my radio show is what it is. It's mm-hmm. I have this, for those of you that are listening that don't know, I have this radio show called the Broken Jukebox Society on Apple Music. And, and it's really fun because I just talk to artists, people that are my heroes, not necessarily about their music, but about the songs that inspire their music, the songs that, instantly evoke those memories. Like, I asked Vince Gill the other day, I said, okay, tell me about when did you, what was your first car? And what was the tape that was in that car? And when you first started driving, and he knew exactly what that song was, and those songs, and we all have them, that when we hear them, they come on and you remember where you were when you first heard that song, or that song instantly evokes a memory. Maybe it's your first breakup, or the first girl you kissed, or your first car, or the first time you ever got grounded, or whatever, whatever it is. There's a song that instantly is the soundtrack of that. And I like digging into to the soundtrack of people's lives. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about. For me, it's, there's nostalgia involved.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. I like going back and listening now to artists that I've loved forever and discovering new songs that I never heard from them. That's another thing I'm really into right now, is kind of re-diving into artists that I've loved for a long while, but maybe didn't listen to this particular record. So I don't know. Maybe I'm boring like that. Natalie would probably tell you I'm musically boring, but I love it.
Well, that's such cool stuff. Like it's fun to talk to people that I've done big things, and then ask them about all those turns and twists in the road, and then the forks, and like, why did you take that route? Were you forced, or was it the only option, or was your heart in it 100%, and why? Like, why did you want to do that? Like for you, Nick, like you said, you were born like with a fiddle in your hand, basically. Do you remember a time? Because obviously, if you don't remember when the fiddle was put in your hand, cool, you're playing it. But then, do you remember like taking it on, like I want to be a fiddle player, or you were like you already just figured I am a fiddle player? But was there a moment where you had to kind of go, all right, I love this, I'm going to do this?
Yeah, I think that because I grew up around those jam sessions, and these old men that I looked up to, including my grandfather, were fiddle players. I think I always thought the fiddle was cool, right? But trust me, though, growing up, when you're playing the fiddle, like nobody thinks the fiddle's cool. The fiddle didn't become cool until I was 17 years old and playing in bar bands. You know what I mean? But for me, I think around the time that I started playing in fiddle contests when I was probably like 10 years old, and I started like getting some attention for it, and also I started winning some fiddle contests, and I started having some success, and I made $40, and that kind of thing. I'm like, hey, I'm making a little money, and I'm having fun, and I'm meeting other friends, and that's when it started to become fun. I think it was around 12 years old or so, though. I remember watching the Grand Ole Opry on TV with my grandpa, and I remember watching Roy Acuff on the Grand Ole Opry, who was this, one of the fathers of the Grand Ole Opry, and he would sit up there and spin his bow around with his finger, and he would sing the Wabash Cannonball and all these old songs, and I just remember thinking, dude, that's cool. Like, I want to move to Nashville and do that. And I remember going down to my room the next day when my grandpa dropped me off at my dad's house, and I remember going in front of the mirror and trying to spin my bow around like that and pretend that I was on the Grand Ole Opry, And so the Grand Ole Opry was kind of what started it for me, I think, seeing that on TV and listening to it on the radio, and then when the '90s country hit, and guys like Garth Brooks and Alan Jackson and Mark Chestnut and Travis Tritt, and they had this incredible Dwight Yoakam. They had these incredible sounds, and there was fiddle in all of it. Like the '90s was like the rebirth of the fiddle, and there were a couple of guys in particular that were my heroes, and now ironically I'm good friends with them. In fact, two of them I just helped induct into the Fiddlers Hall of Fame this last weekend. It was incredible. And so, but these guys, they blew the lid off of it and brought fiddle back into country music. So in the '90s, that's what did it for me. So like the early '90s, these guys are like the class of '89, they call them. It was Garth Brooks, Alan Jackson, Clint Black, and Travis Tritt, right? Those guys, they flipped country music on its ear. So when I first went and saw Garth Brooks at the Target Center in Minneapolis in the early '90s, and Jimmy Mattingly was running around and playing fiddle, that was the first time I'd seen a fiddle player that wasn't standing in the back. This guy was out there in front, sawing in front of the audience, and the chicks were screaming, and I'm like, oh my God, that's what I want to do. You know what I mean? Chicks are flashing this guy and stuff, and I'm going, oh, mind blowing. Beatles on Ed Sullivan for me. I'm like, that's it. I want to be Garth Brooks, and I want to be that fiddle player, and that's what I'm going to do with the rest of my life.
And I want to get flashed by chicks, all of them.
Yeah, I want to get flashed by chicks, it's really, dude. Anybody who tells you they learned to play guitar and they did it because they weren't trying to impress chicks is full of shit. You know what I mean? That's most likely why they're starting to play guitar. So I mean, don't get me wrong. I had the musical background already, but it was stuff like that made me go, yeah, I want to do this, And I always sang, but I didn't really start like singing country music till I got a guitar when I was like 13, 14 years old. And again, it was that 90s country music that made me want to do that, you know? So, I hope that answers your question. It was like around 13 years old, 14 years old. By that time, I knew I wanted to move to Nashville, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up running away from home at 16, 17 years old to do it.
Wow. So what did that look like? And why did you run away from home? Why didn't you didn't have like the blessing of the family, or?
I always had the blessing. I always had the support of the family. But the long story short of me running away from home starts with a principal that I had in high school. His name was Dr. Dean Suter, and he was a doctorate of physical education, and he made you call him doctor. You know, that kind of guy.
Sounds like an asshole. Yeah.
Yeah. And I went to a pretty big high school because it fed from all the local communities and stuff. And I had this bluegrass band that was a all kids bluegrass band, and we were actually having quite a bit of success locally. And I was running this thing like a business, man. I had checking accounts and balance sheets, and I was learning the business, booking contracts, all that kind of stuff. And we were playing like Thursday. We'd leave on Thursday. We'd play Friday and Saturday, come home on Sunday. So I was sometimes missing a couple of days a week of school, but I was getting my homework. My teachers were supportive. In fact, a couple of my teachers would come to our gigs and stuff, and I was learning the business. And my parents are really supportive of that. Excuse me. And one day I got called into that principal's office, and he said, "Nick, you've missed too many days of school aggregate. I think it was like 10 days total or whatever. And when you miss that many days, you're going to lose credit for your junior year of high school." And he said, "You're going to have to repeat your junior year." And I said, "But man, I'm getting like a 3.8 grade point average. I'm working my butt off. And here's why I'm missing these days." And I tried to explain to him, I'm missing these days because I want to play music for a living, and I'm learning the business. And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, "You need to give up on that dream right now. You'll never amount to anything as a musician. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And sorry, there's nothing I can do for you, and you're going to have to repeat your junior year." And I had just come from Branson, Missouri with my grandparents for spring break. And I remember being down there and thinking, I could be doing this right now. I could be up on that stage right now. I know I could do that. And I got home that night and I talked to my dad about it. And I think he sees it a little differently now, but at the time he kind of just told me, "Hey man," and this is fair. He said, "Rules are rules, and you broke the rules. And so there's not much we can do for you. That sucks that you're going to have to do that, but unfortunately you broke the rules." And I remember laying in my bed that night and thinking, all I want to do is go chase my dream. I don't want to play. I want to play music. I can't stay here any longer. The worst thing I could think of was spinning my wheels for an extra year. And so I got up in the middle of the night. I grabbed my guitar and my fiddle and a bag full of clothes. I had a friend drop me. I drove into town. I left my car at my job, and I had a friend drop me off at the Greyhound station in Minneapolis. And my grandpa had given me his credit card to fill up his gas tank a couple of days before that, and I had his credit card in my wallet. So I swiped his credit card for the bus ticket, and I had $60 in cash in my pocket, and I was stupid enough to think that would be enough. And I sent my grandpa's credit card home in the mail, and I ended up sleeping on a park bench for a couple of weeks playing for tips, trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do. And then I ended up getting really lucky when I was down there, and I was playing for these tips every night or every day during on the street. And I would go up to this show called the Dixie Stampede, which was in Branson, and they had these horses in stalls out there, and you could go up and you could at that point you could actually, the horses, if they wanted to, would stick their heads out and you could actually pet them and stuff. And of course, I grew up with horses and I loved riding, and I was really homesick and missing my horses, and so I would go up there every day and pet these horses at the end of the day. And one day this guy came up to me and said, "Hey man, I see you here every day. What's your name?" And I told him my name, and he said, "What's your story? You look like you're 12," which was true, you know. And I told him my story. I said, "I ran away from home, and I'm a fiddle player." And he said, "Can you ride a horse?" And I said, "Yeah, I can ride a horse." He said, "And you can play fiddle too?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Can you sing?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Meet me here tomorrow at 4:00. And so this guy, I did. I showed up at 4:00, and there he was. And it turns out that this guy was the general manager of the entire Dixie Stampede franchise, and he just happened to be in Branson that week. And first thing he did was put me. He led a horse to me and said, "Saddle and bridle this horse and meet me in the arena." That was the first test. So then I went out there and did that. And then he said, "Get on this horse and ride it around in a left lead." So I did that. And he said, gave me a couple other things. And he said, all right. He said, "Now go get your fiddle." So then I sat out in the middle of the arena and played fiddle. He said, "Sing me a song." And I sang him something. I can't even remember what I sang him. He said, "Meet me tomorrow at noon here." And I came back and he said, "I want you to play fiddle and sing in the pre-show. I want you to come in here and be a rider in the Dixie Stampede," which, if you've never heard of the Dixie Stampede, it's like this. They have this like 15 or 16 horse cast, and they do Roman riding and trick riding, and then they do all this fancy drill stuff, right? And it's this big orchestrated show with music and all this stuff. So next thing I know, I'm 17 years old and I'm playing music in the pre-show and riding in the Dixie Stampede, and making like $40 a day, and just was happy as a clam. I thought it was the greatest thing that had ever happened to me. You know what I mean?
Wow.
And that was the beginning of like my whole career. It was through that I met the people that ended up helping me move to Nashville, and I met lifelong horse people, and it was the beginning of my, that was truly the beginning of my horsemanship career too. Like or journey, I should say, because I rode horses when I was a kid. I went to 4-H, but I had no formal training or anything like that. And so that was the first time that I was quickly reminded of how little I know about horses. You know what I mean? And that's subsequently happened a lot more times over my life. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry for the long story, but sorry about the long diatribe, but that's pretty much my story in a nutshell.
Yeah. To back it up to that principle and what he said to you, what a demeaning thing to say to a kid that wants to be a musician. Do you think though that what he said kind of solidified in you a desire to be a musician and be a star when he said you'll never amount to anything?
Yeah, well, it definitely, I always knew that I wanted to, by that point, I knew what I wanted to do with my life, and it was to be on the radio.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that was what I was going to do with my life. So when he told me that, yeah, you bet your ass that I was going to spend the rest of my life or die trying, proving him wrong. And when I ended up later on, getting a record deal with my own band and having my own songs on the radio, not just playing with as a side guy, I actually thanked him in my liner notes. I said, "And finally, thanks to Dr. Dean Suter for telling me I'd never amount to anything, because I spent my entire life trying to prove you wrong." And it lit a fire under my ass. You bet your butt it did. Absolutely.
Did he ever hear from you? Did you ever contact him?
No. In fact, he heard from me. I sent him a letter and a copy of the record, and I never heard from him. So, you know what? I'm sure maybe in his off days he was a really nice guy. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. I'm not going to sit here and trash talk him, but I will say this: I agree with you. That is not the right thing to say to a kid, and I've often wondered how many other kids he talked to like that. That he was the football coach and all this stuff. He was, definitely. If you weren't, I get the vibe. I don't know this for sure, but if you weren't a jock, you weren't his kind of guy, and I was a creative farm kid, it was kind of an oxymoron in a way, you know what I mean? And I wasn't his type, and he didn't have time of day for me. And I bet you that there were lots of other kids that he probably did something similar to. We all have a story like that. Somebody that told us we couldn't do something and it inspired us, So yeah, that's, I have no ill will towards the guy because like you said, it lit a fire under me that made me part of it. It definitely shaped part of who I am. There's no doubt about it. It's funny how one moment, I mean, it feels like it lasted hours, but I guarantee you that was a 5-minute principal's office meeting that changed the entire course of my life.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Well, and just the irony, because, we know that's not the right thing to say, and studies show that, positivity, help kids, but somehow for you, that didn't hurt you. That changed your life for the better. And whatever that is, that's really interesting, right? Because you can say that on one hand, yeah, you shouldn't talk to kids like that, but young Nick Hoffman was like,
yeah, but I was always a pretty confident, arrogant kid in a lot of ways. And also I was at that point, I was really good at doing what I was doing. I was a uniquely talented kid when it came to the fiddle. There were other people that were just as good or better than me. Don't get me wrong. I didn't win every fiddle contest I entered. I got beat a lot, but I was really good, and I had an angle at it that a lot of people didn't, which was I was really good at improvising. I was really good at playing the fiddle kind of from the cuff versus like learning a song and playing it. And that's what later on made me good in playing in bands. Is that I was less a student of the instrument and more a student of using the instrument in a band. Like that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to play in bands. That's because the music I listened to, the fiddle was part of the band. The fiddle contest you played, you sat there and played a fiddle tune. It's like, actually, here, I'll show you. It's like a fiddle tune would be like. That's like you sit there and do that over and over again with a guitar player, and and then somebody else would come up and do the same thing, and then it was like a competition, like a horse show. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, Charlie Daniels was going. I'm like, what the hell is that? You know what I mean? That's what I want to do. I don't want to go. I don't want to do that. Yeah. I want to do. Like that kind of stuff, like all that Garth Brooks stuff. It's like for me, that's where it was at. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when I heard. When I started hearing that first Garth Brooks song, that was like, that changed my life. You know what I mean? Because I knew that's what I wanted to do from that moment on. You know what I mean? And ironically, the ironic thing is that all that happened with that principal, and then I end up in Branson, and it's the horses that end up getting me my first gig. You know what I mean? The horses is what I rode first to get my first gig, which is really kind of interesting. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So something I'm really interested in is, you had that all going on. Where does the TV show come into play in all of this?
Oh, that
Like
happens. Yeah, years later.
right.
Yeah.
So are you like an established musician at this point in terms of
Absolutely. Yeah,
traveling?
the TV show thing happened because of the music.
Sure.
So, and the really quick backstory is that I told you the two things I spent my allowance on were Field and Stream magazine and records, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, no one in my family hunted. I did not grow up in a hunting family. But I was one of those kids that I truly believe this. Some people are wired to be hunters and some people are wired to be gatherers. And that's like anthropologically, scientifically proven, right? And I just was always wired to be a hunter. And I knew it from like a really early age. Like I look back at it now, like I would go tracking deer 8, 10 years old through the woods. I'd find tracks and I'd try and sneak up on deer. And now I realize that was the hunter in me. You know what I mean? I was fascinated by any National Geographic thing that had to do with, natives hunting. Like I just was always really into it. But because nobody in my family did it, the only kind of fix I could get for it was to read Field and Stream magazine. And later on, I'd buy some hunting magazines. And it wasn't until a neighbor guy took me hunting when I was 12 years old. And that was really kind of what changed my life. And then there was another family that I grew up with that took me duck hunting that same year. And, I had a deer hunt and a duck hunt in the same year and I was a changed man, So, to answer your question, Joe, I would be backstage at Chesney concerts, for example, and I would start meeting these quote unquote hunting celebrities, people that were already on TV that I would watch their shows on Outdoor Channel at the time. And I was the only person that hunted in the whole crew. So it was like, I'd recognize them and be like, hey, I know you. You know what I mean? And then, so that led to me meeting other people in the hunting industry because I get to be friends with these people. And then, bit by bit, I started getting myself further and further into the hunting industry, not because I was trying to get into the hunting industry, but because I just started becoming friends with people that were in the hunting industry. And what I later found out and kind of see now is that like people in the hunting industry all want to be musicians and all the musicians want to be in the hunting industry. You know what I mean? And so, okay. And so it started with me getting asked to be a guest on a TV show.
Hey there, On the Move listener. Do you enjoy listening to this podcast? If you made it this far in the episode, I assume you do. But you never know. I could just be talking to someone's house cat at this point. But if you are there and you like the podcast, the best thing you can do to help support our journey to keep this thing going is to find us on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, leave a rating, leave a review, get on social media, follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube. The more we can grow this, the easier it's going to become for us to put out episodes every week and get awesome guests so we can learn and stay on the move just like you. Thanks.
And then I got to be really good friends with those people. And then they ended up becoming one of the biggest celebrities in the whole hunting industry. And then I was a guest on their show every year. And then bit by bit, I started meeting more and more people in the industry. And at some point, me and a buddy, a producer in the industry, we were kind of complaining about outdoor TV. We were drinking beers one night and talking about how there's a lot of bullshit on the Outdoor Channel, in the Sportsman Channel and Pursuit Channel. And it's like a lot of crap. There's good shows, but there's a lot of crap. And he's like, all right, smarty pants, if you had a TV show, what would you do? And I said, well, that's pretty simple. I'm the world's biggest Anthony Bourdain fan. I love Anthony Bourdain. I said I would have like an Anthony Bourdain style hunting show. I'd go around and I would hunt, but then I'd explore local history and food and culture. And I'm just blurting that out. It's not like I had any aspirations to do that. And he's like, he's a producer, and he's like, that's actually a pretty good idea. And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. And I didn't think anything of it. So about a couple days later, he calls me up and he's like, hey, I'm still thinking about that idea. And we fleshed it out a little more, and then I pitched it to another buddy of mine in the industry, and he's like, that's actually a really good idea. And so the idea was that maybe we would produce this show. I'd be in the pilot episode, but then we'd find another host. We'd pitch it to the network, and if they picked it up, they'd, find another host. And we pitched the pilot, and Charlie Daniels is actually in the pilot with me. And I played fiddle with him in the pilot and stuff. And the network was like, no, we really like this, and you have to be the host. And so my band, The Farm, now is rolling, and I've got songs on the radio, and all my dreams are coming true, and all this shit. And I didn't have time for a TV show, but I kind of made a deal with them. I said, I'll try it for 1 year, and if it doesn't work because I don't have time or whatever, I need to be able to back out. And now the 8th season of the show starts next Monday. So here, 9 years later, here I am, 8 seasons in. It's unbelievable. And I've literally done 100+ big game hunts all over the world to the, deepest and darkest corners of the earth. And it's just stuff I'd never. I'm a fiddle player and a singer. Don't get me wrong, I'm always a hunter, but I'm not a TV host. I am now, but that was not something I aspired to do.
Wow.
And
that's kind of like your Dixie Stampede story a little bit.
Yeah. It's like, I say this all the time. People ask me, like, what's your biggest, what's your secret, or what's the trick there? I think the trick is know what your goals are and imagine what your biggest, wildest dream could be. And then prepare yourself for that. Because when that chance comes, typically speaking, it's like Eminem always says, opportunity comes once in a lifetime, right? So it's like, it's true. When your moment comes, are you going to be ready for it? And looking back, it's like the only things I ever cared about were music and horses and hunting and women. And I worked pretty hard at being good at all of them. And and at some point, when the opportunities came, I was ready to hit the ball,
Sure.
And I think that's the thing. It's like, are you going to be ready when your opportunity comes? And I've just been really lucky that I've been fairly prepared. Now, I will say this. I have been humbled by all 4 of those things over and over and over and over again. My first musical, every single time that my opportunity has come and I've taken a big leap into something, I have been in over my head. Every single time. So when I got hired with Chesney, it's a great example. I was 19 years old. I had just come out of Minnesota playing in bands, and I was a big fish in a small pond. And I thought I was hot shit. And that band quickly made me realize that I didn't know a damn thing. That I was greener than green, and I was not as cool as I thought I was. And those guys were quick to put me in my place. You know what I mean? That's happened over and over again throughout my musical career as my career has progressed. The same thing happens with horses. The same thing has happened with women. Like I said, it's all the things that I have tried to, be good at over the years. Every time I think I got it figured out, I realize that I don't. And this fiddle of mine is kicking my ass all over again. I'm going through a whole nother phase of trying to get better and hitting plateaus. And I've been playing that thing my entire life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But how boring would it be if, like, even just one of those things, you're like, yep, got to figure it out now. Like if it was like a math problem.
That's right.
And you could, like, definitively solve it, and you're like, okay.
Yeah.
I got that figured. Like you'd have like this big driver in your life kind of just go away.
That's exactly right. And I mean, that's also the reason that I chase the hobbies that I chase. You know, obviously music, horses, airplanes. These are lifelong pursuits. You know, there's no finish line. And you know, I'm just now starting to realize that not a single hobby that I've ever been interested in my life has a finish line. Not one. They're all endless pursuits. And for some reason, I guess I'm a glutton for punishment, or it's just the way I'm wired, or whatever. But it's the way I am. You know, I choose these hobbies and these lifestyles that keep me consumed and frustrated all the time. You know.
So, like earlier, Nick, you know, you were talking about getting older, or at least realizing that life has a finish date on it. How does that make you approach all of these things that you have in your life? These kind of like hobbies that you never will reach the top, and you can always get better. How does it make you work at those things now that you're like looking at life a little bit more? I don't know, like how do you look at life? I guess in terms of what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good question, and I think it what happens in life. You know, I'm still a young guy. I'm 44 years old. Yeah. I turned 44 2 days ago, but I'm old enough now, and I've had enough water out of the bridge to realize that, and I've lost enough people in my life. In fact, yesterday was the 1 year anniversary of losing my mother. You know, and as you lose people in your life, you start to realize that you're not going to be here forever. The finality of it all starts to come into play. And I'm actually writing a book about it right now. That's about trying to go to your deathbed with the least amount of regret possible. And that's my mantra. That's it. I'm trying really hard to live my life so that when I die and I'm laying on my deathbed and I'm looking back at my life, I'm going to try to minimize the amount of regrets I have. And I know it's impossible to minimize all regret, but my goal is to have checked off as many items of my bucket list as possible, which is an ever evolving thing, obviously, and to leave it all in the field, you know, because tomorrow, it sounds so cliche to say, I recognize it right before I say these words, but tomorrow is not guaranteed, man. I mean, it's just not. So be the best you can be. You know, it's like I fight. Trust me, dude. I love nothing more than I'm a musician. After all, I spent most of my adult life sleeping on a tour bus and going to bed at 4 and getting up at noon. But I'm a farm kid who also had to get up 2 hours before school to do chores, you know? And as I get older now, I'm back to that because it's like I was up at 5 o'clock this morning, you know, just getting after it. And it was noon and I was glad I was up at 5. You know what I mean? Because it's too much shit to do. There's too much to do to not do that. Because, man, it's just life is too short to waste it, you know, spending more time than you need in bed. Don't get me wrong. Every once in a while, we all got to sleep in and enjoy a day in and all that stuff. But I'm the older I get, the more I realize that our days here are numbered, and I want to kick ass every single one of them. You know what I mean? And the problem is that I have too many hobbies that take a lot of time. So like today, for example, I had to choose between, you know, working for stuff for the TV show, riding my horse, flying my plane, doing all this stuff that needs, like, these are hobbies that need upkeep, you know? And that's my own punishment that I've laid onto myself. So, you know, but I love it. I love it. I'd rather be busy than not. And you know what? Both of my grandfathers lived into their very late late ages, and they did that by staying busy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
If that was your biggest problem, Nick, those are uptown problems.
You're damn right.
Yeah.
You're damn right. And man, we've all done it. I've broken ankles and, been laid up for a few weeks here and there, and all that does is just motivate me to, because man, at any given point, one of us could have a catastrophic injury or something, and it's like if that ever happened to me, I wanna at least go out knowing that I had a pretty exciting life. I think you know what, I'm actually kind of plagued by that. Like, my biggest fear is somebody showing up to my funeral and going, not saying, man, he lived life to the fullest. You know what I mean? That's like my biggest fear. Is I want everybody at my funeral to be like, dude, that dude did it. You know what I mean? And I hope that's the case. Because I'm trying. And you know what though? I fail at every turn. Like, to sit here and say that I'm somehow the world, we're talking about my successes. We ought to spend an hour talking about my failures, because I can tell you about all of those too.
Yeah. But Nick, not to put words in your mouth, but I know you want people to say that about you, but even if you feel like you've had failures, I know if I was at your funeral, I'd be like, well, that guy was kind, and he took time for a couple of guys like us. Like, where I'm at in life, when you have the hopes and dreams and you're kind of climbing the ladder, the people that are above you that turn around and talk to you and give you a outstretched hand, or just give you some words of encouragement, or just look at you and actually listen when you talk, like, those are the people that you remember. And the people that kind of are too busy for you, you don't remember them, or you do remember them and it's not nice. You don't go to their funeral, and you don't even give a shit when they die. And so, that is so important to the other people in your life, is that you were kind and that you cared. That's huge.
That's really nice of you to say. And, I'll tell you, if I am like that, it's because there were other people like that for me. And we live by, we live by modeling ourselves after people that we respect. Right. And I'll tell you a quick story that actually happened today. There was a woman that worked with me when my band, The Farm, so I had this band that called The Farm that was on Warner Brothers and had a couple songs on the radio and hits on the radio, did really well. And that was my big dream. I left Kenny Chesney, to finally chase that big dream of me having my own stuff on the radio. And there was this woman that worked for us who was just this extremely talented person. But I was going through pretty rough. Ironically, one of the greatest times of my life was also one of the hardest times of my life. I went through a divorce during that time and all that kind of stuff. And I look back now at that time and realize I was a pretty big asshole to that woman. She worked for us. I wasn't the best person I could have been. That's for sure. And so I've been trying to get a hold of her for about a week, and I actually spoke to her today. And I called her and I said, hey, I haven't talked to you in 10 years, but I want you to know that I'm at a point in my life where I can look back now and realize that I was kind of an asshole to you. And if I ever did anything that hurt your feelings or was inappropriate or somehow was just, like I said, like, if I was an asshole, I'm really sorry. And she didn't know what to say, I don't think, but what she said was really cool. She said, I'm glad you're at that point in your life where you can say stuff like that, and I think that's the key to life is not being so stubborn that you can't recognize your own faults and make apologies and make amends, because, my mom went to her death with a whole bunch of unburied hatchets. And I don't want to be like that. You know what I mean? So I didn't mean to get all deep on you, but it's like, I appreciate you saying that. And that's one of those things too. It's like, you gotta be willing to look back and know when you screwed up and know when to say you're sorry and then learn from that shit. You know what I mean? And that's probably, if you've ever noticed that in me, Ben, it's because I've learned from my mistakes. Because I probably didn't used to be like that, to be honest. I probably was a pretty big dick when I was 25 years old. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In fact, I was. Not probably. I definitely was. You know, and so
no one has facial hair that
no one
and is a good guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no, I'm just picking at you, man.
But no, it's true, and it's like I think that that's the key, man. Learn from your mistakes, move on, and be better. Be better every single day, and that is so much easier said than done. It's easy for me to say that, and I say it as if I've somehow actualized that. No, dude, I screw up every day, but I love the journey. I really do.
But yeah, we all learn from each other. You know, like I'm at that point in my life where I'm just, I wouldn't say learning. I mean, maybe learning. I've been hearing these things my whole life. I was raised pretty well, but like actualizing some of these things. And the other night, my fiance and I, we had something that we had to be kind of firm about with somebody. And we got off the phone, and then I said, hey, but we gotta, it's good we're being firm, but we got to be willing to be wrong. We got to be willing to pick the phone back up and say, hey guys, by the way, we were wrong. Sorry about that. We have to have confidence as long as we think we're right. But hey, we're not gonna, if we're not right, we don't need to die on that hill either. And
it's easy to be right. It's hard to be wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's like there's a song in there somewhere. It's very, very true, and it's such a simple thing to say, but it is so true. And that goes for every aspect of life. Again, bringing it back to horses and music and everything. It's like it's easy to be right. It's hard to be wrong. And the reason for that is because it's hard to admit that we're wrong. The best thing you can do for your partner or your horse or anything is to never make the same mistake twice. And usually, unfortunately, it takes us a lot of those same mistakes over and over again to figure it out. And it's oftentimes somebody else that has to point out that mistake before you realize you're doing it. And that's what it was for at every stage of my musical career. Somebody had to come to me and be like, hey, that thing you're doing up there on stage or the way you're playing there or whatever? No, that ain't working. I'd be like, yes, it is, whatever. And then, whether I agree with it or not, I ended up realizing that chances are if somebody took the time to tell me that, they were right. You know what I mean? Very rarely did somebody take the time to give me some criticism that wasn't correct. I now realized. So now when somebody gives me criticism, I try to take it a little bit differently. You know what I mean? Like maybe they're actually saying that because they're right. So
you guys hear that horn honking?
Yeah, somebody's
Billy Money. Let me go see so they don't screw up our podcast.
Yeah, Nick, I think that's a really good point, though.
I've got Nick on
and that really kind of resonates. Shut up, Ben. Like,
oh, you're good.
People there are haters in the world, but it kind of comes down to delivery. Like if someone actually says like, "Hey, this isn't working, you should do that," and they don't say it in kind of a maniacal way, almost like a taunting way. Like, yeah, you're right. They probably did kind of meditated on that for a while before it was worth saying. That's a really good point that I hadn't thought about till just now.
Well, and it's especially hard in the horse world because the horse thing is there's so many idiosyncrasies and each horse is different and all that stuff. But man, when somebody comes to you and has actually been watching you for a while, and it's not just somebody that like sees something right. It's like a golf swing. You know, you make one bad golf swing and somebody's giving you a bunch of when somebody that actually is thoughtful and comes to you and goes, "Hey, man, I've been watching you for a couple of days, and can I give you a little something?" Most likely, that's coming from a point of caring.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's somebody that actually cares and is saying, "Hey, I've been watching you for a while, and I see this one thing, and I think it would really help you." And help is the true key. That's what that is. That's help. That's not somebody trying to make themselves feel better. That's somebody trying to help you. Man, it's taken me my whole life to accept that because I'm a stubborn ass. You know what I mean? It's like, but the older I get, the more I realize that most of us can see right through bullshit. You know what I mean? Like, when somebody's genuine and is trying to help you and when somebody's just trying to be a dick. You know? And I try to just listen to those people now. I can't tell you how many times in my life I have gotten unsolicited advice from someone that now I realize was really good advice that I didn't take at the time because I was like, "Oh, piss off." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
yeah, because I feel like there's a big trope, and I mean, Ben and I are no different. I know for a fact. Like, there's a big trope about people giving unsolicited advice and how, like, not
especially in the horse world.
100% in the horse world. And, this is not an endorsement for people to go out and give unsolicited advice because that's not what I'm saying.
No.
But I agree with you that if someone is doing that, you have to kind of have a little grace about the situation and be like, well, it's probably them truly trying to be genuine. It's not like it's something they're trying to do for you, not something they're trying to do for themselves.
That's right. Very
generally
rarely
speaking.
I would say very rarely.
It can happen. It 100% can happen. But yeah, you're probably better off just assuming that people are just. There's something I've heard is like, don't attribute to maliciousness what can be attributed to ignorance.
I like that.
Yeah, and that's like 100% with the unsolicited advice deal.
There's definitely some of that, and I think the number one thing that I've learned about that kind of stuff is that I've had to get better about believing in the good nature of people because I'm genuinely typically kind of wired pretty skeptical of people for whatever reason, and I've had to try and be better about just believing that most people are good natured. Most people don't have a vendetta. Most people don't have it out for you. Most people don't think, and maybe that comes all the way back from that principle. Maybe I just assume that everybody is against me. You know what I mean? But I've had to get better at believing that in the good nature of people. And that's also a choice because life is a lot happier when you start believing that people are good or trusting inherently good, that people are inherently good, than when you sit there and walk around through your life thinking that people are inherently bad. You know what I mean? Life just gets happier. And then the other thing that happens is you can weed out the bad people a lot faster, I think. Because the truth is that most people are good. And it's not the other way around. Everybody's got their bad qualities, but most people are inherently good. And as soon as I started to try and live like that, I think I got a lot happier.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the whole thing going back to the horse thing too. It's like, Buck always talking about the fact that there's no problem horses, there's only problem people, right? It's like all horses are inherently good until you screw them up. You know? And I think that the same thing goes for people. I think people want to be good, and people want to be right, and they want to be good and right.
Yep.
But we got real heavy real fast here, didn't we?
Yeah, no kidding.
Yep.
Well, it's just one of those things where, you like you said, you can have that negative outlook and you can end up being right maybe a handful of times, or you can just be happy, and every now and then, maybe you get burnt a little bit, but it's like, well, if someone was really trying to, not do the right thing or really trying to be a bad person, that'll catch up with them anyway, and you just kind of go on and not worry about it.
Absolutely. And it's all about your raising, man. It comes back to raising. Same thing with horses, right? Like, it's in the end, it's about how your first 3 or 4 years are going to make a big difference, and we can always fix our mistakes, but raise your children right. You know what I mean? I was lucky. I had good raising.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Well, I want to talk about your time with Kenny Chesney a little bit, because we've sort of glossed over that a couple times. Where was Kenny at with his career when he picked you up? And not to do a podcast about Kenny, but more about you, and what was that like to, kind of see that whole, the whole career of his kind of kick off and be there for it. Seems like you were there for.
Oh, I mean, it was the greatest rocket ship that there ever was. I mean, I would argue to say that the only rocket ship in the last 20 years of country music, or more than that, I mean, I guess the last 30 years of country music is a better way to put it. The only rocket ship that was more crazy and bigger, for male artists anyway, and maybe of any artist, is Garth Brooks. Like, when I started with Kenny, we were in a club playing for, a 3/4 sold out house. And within 2 years, we were playing for stadiums full of people, for 60,000 people. And it felt like I grabbed onto a rocket ship right before it took off. And I will forever be indebted to Kenny for that journey, because, there was a period of time there where, in the 2005 to 2015, and he still is. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's still one of the biggest selling artists in the world. But there was a period there where he was the highest selling ticketed act in the world. Like, above U2, above AC/DC, above Bruce Springsteen, above everybody. It was him, because he was the only guy that was playing, multiple football stadiums every year and all that stuff. So, and to get to be part of that is every musician's dream come true. Literally. I mean, like, my goal when I moved to town was to be like, someday maybe I'll get to play for 10,000 people. That was like kind of my goal. And now here we are playing for 30,000 minimum every night, and I'm playing on the records, and I'm playing on other people's records. And then I'm getting calls to play with all these other artists. And then I eventually get my own record deal. Like, dude, it's the stuff that movies are made of. I couldn't have written a script better for myself. And I still pinch myself. Did that actually happen? When you're in it, you don't realize how cool it is. It's not until you look back at it and you're like, wow, that was really neat. I mean, we made a movie. Like, there was a full-on Kenny Chesney 3D IMAX movie that we went to LA and had a premiere for, and like Morgan Freeman and Matthew McConaughey were there. I mean, this is the shit that you can't make up. Letterman and Leno and, Conan and, all Today Show and Good Morning America, and not just once, but like dozens of times, just all this stuff. It's just blows my mind, and the friends I made and the people that I met. It's just, like I said, I'll forever be in debt to him, because it was because of Kenny that I got to achieve my bigger dreams, to have my own songs on the radio and to have my TV show. that's all because of him. It's all because of that platform that he gave me, and I'll forever be in debt to him. Like I said, it's, don't get me wrong. Like I said, when your moment arrives, you have to be ready to hit the ball. But man, a lot of the balls that were set up for me to hit were because I was affiliated with him, and I'm forever in debt to him for that.
What's the structure?
What a ride.
What's the structure of working for an act like that? How much time do you have to, I don't know, like how much time per week are you with the band, or is it like being a part of a big family, or do you feel like you work for a company? I've always wondered about that, especially the musicians, when you're not like maybe the star of the act, but you're up there.
Yeah, that's an interesting, that's show. Actually a really, that's an interesting question. I've never heard it quite put like that. It depends on the act. I will tell you this. First off, you're an employee of a company. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you're talking about a multi-million-dollar mega operation. I mean, hundreds of over 100 semi trucks and 25 or 30 buses and hundreds of people going down the road all at once. It's like moving an army. Just the grocery order alone for the catering to feed this army of people and all the crew, local crew and everything. Just that alone is like advancing a small army. You know what I mean? So you're part of a company, first off. But that's why I say it starts at the top, because I have seen and been a part of many different organizations, other than Kenny's, my own included. And Kenny made everybody feel like they were family. And that's not the case for other artists. I'm not going to throw any other artists under the bus, but like, Kenny, great leadership starts at the top, and Kenny made everybody feel like they're family. And because of that, everybody worked their butts off for him. You know what I mean? And there's this, recently there's a saying that we had out there for years, and recently he just put it on t-shirts and made a big song and a bunch of other things. It's like, who lives like we do? We do. Yeah, so it was always the big thing. It's like, who lives like we do? We do. It was like our big chant. And it's because he made us feel like he wasn't the only person living the high life. We're all living the high life. You know what I mean? And he made us remember that even though we're all working our butts off, this is the dream. We're doing it, And so being part of his organization was really cool. You know what I mean? It was because he made you feel like you were part of the reason that he was being successful. And that's not always the case. I'll just tell you that. There's a lot of artists out there that make it all about them, and you're expendable and dispensable. But Kenny made us all feel like we had a major role in what he was doing. And that was not only smart, because when you make people feel like that, they work harder for you, but also I think he genuinely that's the way he felt. He comes from a small town, and he had good raising as well. And he realized that we're all just lucky to be here, and I learned a lot from that. It was like going to country music college for me. I had a really good role model in him, and I've tried to implement that in my own business now.
Well, that's interesting, because you came from a small town as well. And I'm sure most of us, like Joe and I and a lot of our friends, we're all small town people. And you think, well, if I ever hit it big someday, I'd be the regular guy and I'd treat everybody fair and I'd keep my old friends and yada, yada. But you haven't been around a lot of these bands and kind of insider in Nashville. You've probably had an opportunity to see a lot of both sides of that. People who do kind of do that, and people who don't do that at all. And
oh yeah, and I've met some of my heroes too. Like they always say be careful of wishing to meet your heroes because you're probably going to be disappointed. And there has been a couple cases where I've met some people that I really looked up to that were just really disappointing. And I've always kind of vowed to never be like that, and granted, I'm not as big of a dude as a lot of people out there, but I've had some success in my life, and man, life's too short to be an asshole. You know what I mean? It just is, like we talked about before.
If that's not on,
and that comes. It ought to be. Yeah, and it's also, again, that's lessons I learned from guys like Kenny. That's those. I mean, he's a class act and as good as anyone who's ever done it, on and off the stage, no doubt about it.
Did you struggle? Because you said you started at 19, right?
With him?
Yes.
Yeah, 19, 20, somewhere right in there.
Sure. So, like, to go through that meteoric rise in your early 20s, I mean, how does someone stay, like, keep, like, humble and have, like, a normal perspective on life if you're attached to that rocket ship, like you said?
I think a lot of it, again, I mean, I was lucky to be raised by great women and great men. Mm-hmm. Like, my grandparents, I had all four grandparents up until well into my late 20s, some of them into my 30s. My last grandma just died a couple of years ago at 99 and a half. I was really lucky to have these strong women and men in my life. And then both my mother and my father were just really cool people. So and they were great parents. And so I think it starts there, but don't get me wrong. Like I said earlier, I went through a phase in my 20s where I drank the Kool-Aid a little bit. We were the biggest stars on the planet. You know what I mean? It was like, it was, and I felt it and I was enjoying it. And I'm sure I was, like I said, I'm sure I was a little more of a dick than I needed to be back then, but I drank the Kool-Aid a little bit, I'm sure, but I have lots of friends that I met through that age that I'll say that to them and they're like, no, you weren't like that, but there's no way I wasn't. There's no way I wasn't, Sure. But I think we're all like that in our 20s. You know what I mean? It's just like, I think that 100%. there's a phase we all go through where we think we're bulletproof and we're not, Yeah. I'm lucky I made, I'll tell you what, I'm lucky I made it out of that phase without getting my ass kicked a couple of times. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I think luckily I got my ass kicking out of the way when I was in high school. I handed out a couple and got a couple. So I think that'll make everybody realize what you need to know,
Yeah. So I was going to ask you too.
Yeah. Well, at the very least, you came out the other end okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you also. So you got, you ran away from home, and then, things happened. And when was the next time that you saw your parents? Was that a big deal, or was that like nothing to it? Life went on.
My mom and I stayed in touch. My mom sensed something was happening, and she was actually looking into some options for me to, like I said, I was doing really well in school, and she was looking for some options for me, like test out of high school. Like she sensed my restlessness. The straw that broke the camel's back was that principle, and this whole deal of redoing another year of high school. My dad and I, because I lived with my dad, my parents divorced when I was younger and I lived with my dad. My dad and I butted heads a lot in high school. And he was pretty pissed. You followed the rules and you worked and you didn't do things like run away from home. That's not the way I was raised. So he and I didn't really have much of a relationship for another, at least 5 or 6 years, but I would say that my dad and I probably didn't really repair our relationship until I was about 30. You know what I mean? We, don't get me wrong, we were cordial. I'd go home for Christmas and I'd do stuff, and but my dad and I are best friends now. I mean, I'll be remiss if I go, out of 7 days, my dad and I are talking 5 of them, at least for a couple of minutes. He's my best friend in the whole world. And I remember him early on, saying, when I was like a teenager, he's saying, I'm the best friend you'll ever have. Don't ever forget that. And I always will be. And now I see it. I'm like, that's 100% true. And I tell my daughter that too. I'm like, I'm the best friend you'll ever have. Don't ever forget that. My dad and I are buddies now, but man, there was a period of time there where we did not see eye to eye. Yeah. But
So how did that come together though? Like who made the first step?
It was me. It had to have been me. Yeah. He wasn't gonna, I don't know. I'm sure he'd tell you the same thing. He's, I think he's more of I've laid the groundwork. I'll sit back and wait for you to come back around kind of thing.
Yeah.
Plus he was pissed and he had every reason to be pissed, like I broke the Hoffman family rules, man. You don't just ditch. Like we've talked about it later. He's like, I wish he would have just kind of came to me and said, dude, I got to go to Branson now and I need your help. I bet you he would have probably figured out a way for me to do that. Mm-hmm. And that's what I didn't realize at the time. I thought my only option was to get the hell out of there. And now I realize that, like if my daughter came to me right now and said, hey, this is what I want to do. And here's the reasons. And here's the thing. I mean, I would probably do whatever I could to help her. I just thought my options were not open to me because he was, he's fairly firm about stuff. He's like, this is the way we do stuff and this is the way it's going to be. And so I didn't think there was an option. Now I realize there was, it's like the old adage, a permanent solution to a temporary problem. You know what I mean? That's kind of what running away from home was. There was no backing away from that shit. I was gone. They didn't know where I was at first either. I mean, it was a full-on running away from home. My poor mother, she must have been just freaked out.
How'd they locate you?
They had a sneaking suspicion that that's where I went. It took them a little while to figure it out. And there was a friend of ours, family friend of ours, that was living in Branson. One day, a couple days later, he came strolling up on me on the sidewalk, and he said, "Get your ass in my truck right now." He was pissed, and he said, "Your family's been. I'm driving up and down this road looking for you, not even sure if you're here. Your family's looking for you, yada yada yada." And he was a great influence for me later on as well. Big mentor. And one of the reasons that I ended up with the Chesney gig, that same guy. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Man. That kind of brought it full circle. It's such a cool story, but it's so much, there's a lot of hope in that, for anybody at any point in their life that there's always a bright side. And like you were saying earlier, know your goals and keep on trucking. Don't throw in the towel. There's always a twist and turn that you don't know is coming.
That's right. And the other side of it too is that keep on preparing, like we talked about, for those moments. Like if you got a goal, man, don't let anybody tell you can't do it. And just keep on preparing and just keep setting yourself up for opportunities. Because eventually one of those opportunities is going to convert. You know what I mean? It's one of those things is going to fall into place. It will. And it sounds so cliche, but it will. And it does. And I've seen it over and over again, not just in my own career, but in lots of other people's careers. If you're ready for your moment when it comes, I believe the universe kind of hands that stuff to you when you're ready. And usually it hands it to you when you're just barely ready. Like, you know what I mean? But it does.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Wow. Yeah, shoot. Yeah. If you read the Bible even, right, you've got David and Goliath. You've got all these stories about people who kind of had a little mustard seed, but gosh, they didn't think they were ready. And this thing just gets handed in their lap. Like, here, go forth and do this totally unthinkable task. And they pull it off.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. And it's no different than, I mean, we all remember the first time we ever dallied off on a cow, or it's like, it feels like it's all just, oh my God, and you're so in over your head. And then the next time you do it, it's a little better and a little better and a little better and a little better. And that's what those musical moments felt like too. You know what I mean? The first time you're playing in front of 60,000 people, there's no way to prepare yourself for that other than just diving in and doing it. And then every time it gets a little easier, and because you know what to expect and you're ready for the changes a little more, But you got to be willing to take leaps, and you got to be willing to dive into the deep end. If you're not, you'll never accomplish anything. I believe that.
Yep.
Well, final question for me. Before we, and then I'll let Joe. Who is kind of who is the coolest hero that you got to meet? And I'm thinking more like old timey, country music stars, guys who were like legends. Who's the coolest guy you met, or gal?
I've been really lucky. My list of heroes is pretty long, and I've been really lucky that I've been able to meet a lot of them. There's just a few of them that I've really gotten to spend a lot of time with or get to know really well. But I will say that the one that blows me away, because the full circle moment for me, is Garth Brooks is one of the reasons that I do what I do. His influence in country music in general is larger than life. I mean, literally the biggest, most successful period of country music, monetarily, radio, everything, is directly ushered in because of him. And the reason that I do what I do on stage is directly because of him. So the fact that I've gotten to hang out with him, interview him for my radio show, meet him on several occasions, that he knows me by name, man, I think that's about the coolest thing that there is. You know what I mean? So, to meet heroes like that, pretty incredible. I've gotten to spend time on the bus with Willie Nelson. I won't tell you what I did on the bus with Willie Nelson, but I have spent time on the bus with Willie Nelson. That was the times that I've gotten to hang with Willie. I actually got to get on stage and sing, on the road again with him once at Farm Aid. Like, that kind of stuff's been incredible. Getting to meet people like Vince Gill and Reba McEntire. These are larger than life people that somehow or another have become kind of like friends. It's blows my mind, and the list goes on and on. It's football players and hunting celebrities, and it's just incredible. Honestly, one of my favorite people I ever got to meet is Buck. Getting to hang out with a guy like Buck and sit at a Mexican joint and have some tequila with him was really fun for me, because here's a guy that I've looked up to for years, and when you meet your heroes, like I said, it can go one of two ways. And lucky, my experience with Buck was really, really great, and it goes on and on. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think what it sounds like is that I'm a person who genuinely likes to look up to other people because I think that's important. Anybody who says that they don't need heroes is stupid, because you got to be inspired somewhere by something. And if you're not finding inspiration somewhere in this life, then you're doing something wrong, you know? So I love it. I love finding these people and looking up to them. And I'm not afraid to say it. I think Garth Brooks is my hero. Buck's my hero. Reba McEntire is my hero. Dolly Parton is my hero. I got lots of heroes. I'm not afraid to say it. I look up to them, and my heart beats faster when I'm around them. No matter how many cool things I do, I'll always be like that.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Yeah, couldn't be a better answer. I think, doesn't Garth have a place not too far from here? I think here in Georgia, because I know his wife is from.
I didn't know that.
Right up there in Monticello, and there's a little pizza joint.
That's right.
And they've got autographs from everybody, but they've got a lot of paraphernalia of Trisha.
That's cool
stuff in there, and that's their claim to fame is her hometown.
Yeah, she's like, incredible. I got to hang out with her this last weekend too, and she was just like so down to earth and so cool. And that's what those are the people that we need to be emulating, not the other way around. Social media is teaching us that we need to emulate people that do not have that kind of integrity. And I don't know, maybe I'm just too old school, but people like Garth and Trisha are the kind of people that I want to be emulating. People like Buck, that's what I want to be around.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Well, should we wrap her up, fellas?
I thought he said that you were last.
Yeah, I thought you had a whole list there.
Yeah,
Joe.
This is me being last.
There you go. Well, I've enjoyed it, guys. I'll do this with you anytime. I enjoyed it. We didn't get to talk much about horses, but I don't have any big knowledge to share about that anyway.
Oh, it's all right. Good. Yeah, this has been really cool, man. I mean, I've met you in person once, but didn't know the whole backstory and everything. So I'm glad I got to hear it and have all that now. But yeah, it's I think you're absolutely right, man. You said a lot of cool stuff, and I'll definitely I'm gonna listen back to this podcast. But I totally agree with you that you just got to keep preparing, and life will bring things to you if you're diligent about that. And honestly, everything you've kind of done in your life seems to be a testament to that. So shout out to you for being prepared when the time comes.
I appreciate it. I think if you're not improving, you're dying. That's it.
Would you say you got to stay on the move?
I'd say you have to stay on the move. I would agree with that. I like that.
And we got him on the camera saying it. All right.
There you go. Really that was purely for the promo later.
I love it.
Thanks, man.
I appreciate you guys. See ya.